Hi, everyone. I'm Stephen W. Long. This is The Writing Life. And in preparation for the show today, I was thinking that we read for different reasons. One of those reasons is to be introduced to an unfamiliar world. Often that's fiction. Today is not that case. This is all real life. And so honored to have Phil Pirages with us today and talk about the memoir, Booked by Fate. So first, welcome, Phil.
Thank you.
Yeah. We're here to talk about this, your memoir, but I wonder, you've written fiction as well. Snakes and Butterflies is the short story I read. And I know that although it's fiction, it derives from your childhood, and I think probably heavily influenced your future, your life. Would you just say a word or two about that?
I think it'd be useful as background for this particular book to talk about the gifts that I'm given as a human being.
Sure.
And the ineptitudes. I can't swim a lick. I'm terrible with machines. And in industrial arts class, I couldn't even plane a cutting board, okay? But I could always write.
Yeah.
And I think it was partly because when I was young, I was good at imitating it. And writing involves a lot of imitation. So when I was in junior high school, I used to write stories that would amuse my classmates. In high school, I was on the student newspaper. In college, I was the editor of the student newspaper, which was important because it got me a job as a reporter on a daily paper.
Oh, okay.
And that was important because it got me a job teaching journalism. So I taught writing for 10 years, not just journalistic writing, but creative writing, expository prose and so on. I wrote a master's thesis, I wrote a doctoral dissertation, and then for 47 years, I've been writing catalogs.
Right.
For my rare book business, which is what Booked by Fate is all about.
Right.
For many years, I did the cataloging. For the last 10 years or so, I do final editing, and I've got wonderful staff people to actually do the basic cataloging. Now, the most important part of the context for this book, the background for this, when I was in graduate school, I was in over my head. I went to the University of Michigan, coming from a small college where the curriculum wasn't as demanding as the other people who were coming in the doctoral program were facing at Stanford and Columbia and Harvard and Yale and all these other big schools. I was in over my head, and I was pretty close to being tossed out of the program. I got my act together, and I was able to find my way academically, but I still felt like I didn't belong. Okay. And then I found out that there was the Avery Hopwood creative writing contest. And if you were enrolled in creative writing classes, you could enter. And they had big money for the winners.
Okay.
And so I wrote a play, I wrote an autobiographical essay, which is really a memoir, entitled Coming of Age in an Industrial Bowling League. And then I wrote this novella, it's 14,000 words, so short story novella, called Snakes and Butterflies, which is about a caddy who learns about the class for the first time.
Right.
So there are
the class distinctions.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there are three stories that I have to tell from my life. 13-year-old caddy, 18-year-old guy working in a pretty dangerous factory at night, and then my life as a bookseller.
Okay.
So that's the context that we're talking about.
Okay. So one of the things that I thought about, and I think this is a good example of, is we don't know what life holds for us. We may plan for the future, think we know what the future is, but I believe this is right. Your plan all along wasn't to be a rare book dealer.
Oh, not at all.
Okay. Can you talk about your first sale? I just thought that was such a fun story.
The first sale or the first purchase?
Well, but you had to purchase it to sell it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So which are you on?
Purchase.
Okay. So you're right. I had planned to be an academic.
Yeah.
And I was Dr. Phil because I got my PhD at the University of Michigan. And I got hired at Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo. Mm-hmm. Now, when I was hired, I hadn't finished my dissertation yet. I was writing on comic plays that were produced in London in the 1660s. And when I moved to Kalamazoo, I discovered that I could afford to buy a house. In Ann Arbor, there's no chance.
Okay.
So I bought an old house, and it was empty because I didn't have any goods.
Sure.
And so I started going to garage sales to find furniture. And one day at a garage sale, I found, it's a long and interesting story, page 13, 14, and 15. I found an old book that was printed in 1669 in London, a book from the time and place where I was doing my doctoral dissertation research. And I looked at that, and for the first time in my life, this book was a cultural artifact.
Right.
Before, it was just a repository of information or something to hold a plot.
Right.
But there it was, and the woman wanted $45. 1976, the car I was driving cost $150.
Right.
So it was not an inexpensive thing, but it was a big book. It had 50 copper plate engravings. It was an architectural book.
Okay.
It had columns. And I thought, man, it would really be wonderful to have that. She took 35, and I had it. And from there, my occupation as a bookseller began.
Okay. So a couple of things. When you were attracted to that object, as I think anybody would be, when you acquired it, was it with the idea of putting it on the shelf and admiring it? Or did you think immediately about reselling it?
I had no clue what I was going to do with it.
Okay.
All I knew was I was going to start asking questions.
Okay.
And my life as a bookseller, has depended on the kindness of strangers,
Right.
Over the years. And so I spent the first 6 months just saying, look what I've got. Can we figure out what it's worth? And if we can, how do we do that?
Yeah.
I found out there are such things as auction records of sales.
Okay.
And I found out that book had been sold only once in the 20th century, and a copy of it.
Okay.
And that copy, not the copy I had, but another copy, had sold for $1,000.
Yeah.
And I thought, whoa,
Yeah.
I've got this aptitude for this particular occupation.
Okay.
And as a matter of fact, a year later, 18 months later, I sold it to a specialist in architectural books.
Okay.
And he bought it for $1,000.
Yeah.
And now here's the part that really made the difference for me.
Yeah.
I asked him, I know this is impertinent, but do you mind, would you tell me when you sell it, how much
Because
you sell
that's
it
his
for?
business.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. He wasn't going to hang on to it. He was going to sell it.
Yeah, he buys and sells books. That's
Right.
what he does for an occupation.
Right.
He called me 3 days later. He said he
3 days.
he sold it for $3,000.
Yeah, yeah.
And I thought, whoa, this guy made a phone call,
Yeah.
and $2,000 mysteriously appeared.
right.
And I thought, this is for me.
Yeah.
Because the guy, first of all, he looked like the guy on the Monopoly card, this little mustache and his little, plump and his well-dressed. He has this beautiful house on the
Now,
Delaware
if you say
River.
he's got a monocle, I'm working.
No, he didn't have a monocle.
Draw the line.
But anyway, he looked like he was having a wonderful life,
Sure.
selling books out of his home.
Yeah.
And I thought, I would like to do this maybe.
A couple of things. One is that had to be, I would think, in your life, a real left turn. Again, you didn't plan this. It just, this opportunity arose, and it was attractive. That's one thing.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is, this is all pre-internet. So I assume that you went to the library?
Absolutely.
How did
yeah.
you find this guy? Or did somebody tell you, hey, you,
No,
know,
I
you ought to
just-
call so-and-so?
I just asked around.
Okay.
You know, I started with Eleanor Pinkham at Kalamazoo College, and she said, talk to this guy, and I asked, it was just, you know, tell me.
Right. And I think maybe, to broaden this a little bit, the difference at that time, almost whatever you're going to do, is it just took more time. You just couldn't. We would be frustrated today to take that long to find something, but that's the way it was.
That's the way it was. Yeah.
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 Okay.
Yeah.
So before we got started here, I told you that I looked on YouTube, and you've got a lot of stuff on there, presentations about this business and about the items themselves and
Various
so on.
kinds of books.
Yeah, various kinds of books. And one of the things that I was intrigued by, you talked about people collecting stuff, but they collect anything. Your area happens to be books, but people collect.
Oh,
I
oil
suppose-
rags. That was.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about that, but what a goofy. I wonder what. So maybe this is a way to enter that topic. What is it about collecting things, whatever that is, that you think attracts people?
Well, I say in my YouTube segment about that, I think that the world is such a scary place that you're kind of inclined to impose some sort of order on
Okay.
it. And then that sort of quiets the noise in a way. And so if you can have all of Joseph Conrad's first edition
Right.
in dust jacket on your shelf, and there ain't no more, you got them all.
Right, right.
That little corner of the world is quiet
Yeah.
and safe.
Yeah.
And I think that's a part of what's going on with
Okay.
anybody who collects.
And that would be across the spectrum. It doesn't matter what the item is. It's that
I
you
think
have
so.
control. You've corralled this.
Yeah,
this
yeah. And I
thing.
mean, there's way more to it. Other reasons. I mean, people. It's a quest,
Sure.
and that's kept me going.
Okay.
And keeps me now wanting to still follow this occupation. A lot of
Yeah.
people who've reached my age have stopped, but the quest, the idea of looking for, finding unexpectedly oftentimes,
Right.
is so interesting and is so much fun.
Well,
I don't want to quit.
I was wondering if the word fun would come up. I mean, it seems fun to me. I didn't know that you would apply that word, although I would.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So one of the things that you had mentioned, the word that you used is facilitator. That you're you help people collect stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if you'll agree with that, can you just talk about it? What's that role? How do you see that role?
That's a difficult question because I see myself as a foster parent when it comes to the books I have in my inventory.
Okay.
And I know I'm going to have to give them up, just like a foster parent knows.
Sure.
And I want that child to get into a good home.
Right.
But at least for now, it's mine.
Right.
And if you want to have it, you're going to have to pay a decent price for it. Now, the farther along I've gotten in the occupation, the more I've developed relationships with clients who told me, look, I'm looking for this kind of book.
Sure.
And so there are moments, or there are times when the period that this book is a foster child is very short. But in any case, it's part of the business. It hasn't been as important in my business as it has been in some other booksellers. Some other booksellers, they could just as well be selling corks or crankshafts.
Sure.
You know,
Sure.
I like the things on my shelf. I'm sorry, maybe I should seek psychiatric help, but I liked seeing those books.
You know, a question that I hadn't anticipated, but it just came up. Have you ever, or would you ever, refuse to sell a book to someone? Would they not treat it with the care that you think they should?
It has happened.
Really?
It
Okay.
has happened. And I'll tell you, it was a friend who was at the top of the business lost his mind. And he took a vast illuminated manuscript leaf that had belonged to what's Isabella, Ferdinand Isabella.
Yeah.
Absolutely stunning, and cut it up into little postage stamp pieces to sell on eBay. And that was the end of my selling to him. I sold him that. That was the last thing I ever sold him. Yeah.
I'm telling you, I think I've told you before, I'm telling the folks who watch this, I absolutely love this book. And there's so many stories of people. So it's about books, but it's about people too. And one of the things I was thinking was, the assumption, my presumption would be, people who collect books are pretty financially stable. They eat every day and they live indoors and so on. In fact, you sold to a couple of homeless guys.
Yeah, I did.
Can you talk about that?
Well, that was a real unusual case.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't know they were homeless.
Right.
They ordered, they paid.
Yeah.
The odd thing was that the payments were made on different credit cards.
Right.
And different names. So that was a little odd. But finally, the mother, there were two brothers.
Okay.
The mother informed us that they didn't have a home.
Right.
And it would probably be best if we didn't sell to them anymore.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, the memoir, some people have said to me, I'm glad you wrote this, which I always thought was a little strange. I mean, I wanted to write it for me, and the pandemic came along and gave me the opportunity.
Right.
But other people said that they're glad that it's written. And I think that what makes it interesting to people is that, number one, it's full of interesting characters.
Absolutely.
And number two, it's a Horatio Alger story.
It's that too.
I mean, the guy started out with less than nothing, and with hard work and good luck and the kindness of strangers.
I was going to say the support.
Turned less than nothing into something.
Yeah.
And I've had 3 stories to tell: the caddy story, the factory story, and the rare book story.
Yeah.
And that's all it takes. And it's easy as pie. What you do is much tougher. Writing a novel, you got to make up this stuff. The snakes and butterflies, about the caddy, that was fiction, but it was based on things that happened to me when I was a caddy. But you're making stuff up, from scratch. And that's hard. And I also think it's harder to read novels than it is to read memoirs. Yeah. I read a lot of, what I read is mostly biography.
Sure.
And it just moves along, and I believe it. I never have to say, I don't believe this. This is just,
yeah. It's a good point. So that if you're talking about fiction, I've been told that the first paragraph or so in a novel is a contract between the author and the reader. And what the author is saying is, I'm going to take you on a journey. I'm leaving, the train is leaving the station, and I'd really like you to come along. And my guarantee to you is, I won't break that wall. I won't do something to make you not believe that this is a true story. So that's it. But I want to get back to not the finance exactly, but the payment, because you were, at least in one instance, were paid in something other than money.
Oh. One of the most interesting characters was a farmer. He wore the overalls, and he'd be, central casting. He would have been good. And he was interested in Bibles and in incunabula, the 15th century books, old books. And these are not cheap.
Yeah.
But he would come, and he was Oh boy, he would have been one of these guys who lives in a cellar because he thinks the world's going to come to an end.
Right.
What's the word? Doesn't matter.
Prepper? Survivalist?
Yes, that's it.
Okay.
He didn't believe in banks.
Okay.
You know, he wasn't part of the system.
Right.
So he paid me in gold bars.
Yeah.
And he was elderly and self-aware.
Yeah.
And he said, I'm going to pay you in installments. And the gold bars were on deposit in my bank account. But he says, if I croak, you know, my son will come and settle things up.
Okay.
Before the payments were finished. And that's in fact what happened.
Oh, okay.
But I mean, he was a great customer.
Yeah.
There's a short chapter in here about deadbeats.
Yeah.
and that's the one thing that has made life really unpleasant when it comes to interactions with customers. And he was in the pantheon of clients when it comes to
Right.
payment. He was at the top. He was at the top.
So that reminds me of another part. Well, let me touch on this, and then we'll go to people who maybe didn't pay you. But in terms of gold, and I'm thinking of the color gold, didn't somebody pay you in honey?
He was the same guy.
Say, okay.
Yeah.
So he had the gold covered.
Yeah, he raised bees
Okay.
on his farm.
Yeah.
And he would come around and he would give me honey. And we had a joke about that was his payment.
That was his payment,
yeah.
okay. I could get on board with that. But now there were, and in my world, not an insubstantial amount was owed to you, and somebody was going to make payments and then just stopped?
What I remember,
Yeah.
and the biggest problem I had in this respect
Right.
was a guy in Louisiana who told me he wanted to sell his collection of privately printed, especially printed books,
Okay.
and had me come down, and we agreed on $60,000 for his collection, 20,000, 20,000, 20,000.
Okay.
This is a while ago, 30 years ago probably,
Yeah.
so it was a substantial amount of money. And in a very interesting coincidence, this is page 87, I discovered that this guy had bought books but never paid for them.
Oh, okay.
And that the $60,000 in books were basically stolen.
Yeah.
And I was in trouble. I ran down to the bank
Yeah.
and I said, has this $20,000 check gone through yet?
Yeah.
And the woman said, oh, yes, it has. And so then I had to get in touch with the IRS,
Yeah.
and I had to hire a lawyer, and eventually it all turned out okay because I was Robin Hood, because I was able to find out the dealers that he had screwed.
Sure.
And said, you know, I'm going to get your money back, or I'm going to get your book back.
Right.
And in the end, the IRS, which could have taken everything if they wanted to,
Sure.
but I met an IRS agent I actually liked.
I think you were proactive. I think maybe that's the difference. They didn't come to you, you went to them.
I went to them, yeah. Anyway, they got a little tiny bit, and I came out okay. It's a lot of work and a lot of stress.
Sure.
And the guy was such a turd. I'm sorry.
I think we can say that.
And in the end, he ended up dying of alcoholism out in the open.
Probably no surprise, huh?
Yeah. Anyway.
So again, you met some, and I want to talk about people who were very supportive and who you counted on and came through. But there is a little side note about a fellow who was not pleased with you, and we're going to get to Mr. Walker and so on, but you talked him out of buying something, and then you got a phone call from a fellow who was a book dealer, sounded almost like a Hell's Angel kind of.
Okay. I met Jay Walker, who
Right.
was the founder of Priceline.
Yeah.
And at the time I met him, he had a great deal of money. He was on the list, on the Forbes list at the time. Not now, but he was then. And I was one of the first interactions I had with him.
Yeah.
He wanted my advice about whether he should buy a book from a bookseller whose name I didn't know. I was just basically getting started. And the guy was asking him to buy a King James Bible for $300,000,
Yeah.
okay? And it had a brief description, but it said things like title page missing and back cover detached and so on.
Right.
It looked like a wreck,
Yeah.
And the King James Bible is a valuable thing, but not 300,000. Give me a break.
Right.
So I told Jay Walker, and I wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
And the next thing I know, I get an email that says, quote, "The next time you tell Jay Walker not to buy a book from me, you're a dead man."
Yeah.
That caught my attention.
Then not difficult to interpret that. Yeah.
Now, fortunately, I reported this to Jay after I had revived Ellen, my wife.
Yeah.
And he said, "I'll take care of it."
Yeah.
And it turns out the guy who was threatening was an alcoholic, a former Hell's Angel.
Yeah.
He was out on parole. He'd been in jail. And what he had done, frankly, he could have got him back in the clink.
The threat.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And Jay told me, he lives in Boston. He doesn't have a driver's license. You're safe.
Uh-huh. And yet you ran into him.
I did run into him 3 or 4 years later
Yeah.
when he was standing outside the Boston Book Fair handing out leaflets with lists of Bibles that he was selling
Yeah.
for very big numbers.
Yeah.
And he was very scary. He had hair all over the place
Yeah.
and leather all over the place. And
Yeah.
he was a big guy who could have broken me in half pretty easy.
I suspect you did not introduce yourself.
I took a
Just kept
detour.
walking.
Yeah.
So Bibles are a great segue, because I have a little story that I want to tell you. But you said sometimes the value of a Bible is the notes in it, and I think probably to clarify a passage maybe or something.
Mm-hmm.
My little story is that my dad had a Bible of one of his relatives, and handwritten in the margins, it was like a diary, and he would make notes in there. And in one part, I remember he said, we camped on the east edge of the river, waiting for winter so that it would freeze and we could cross.
What do you know?
And I thought, that's my story. I thought that was a fun
No,
note in there.
one of the major things when it comes to determining the value of a book is who owned it.
Sure.
And many times you have no idea.
Right.
And many more times you do have an idea, but the person's not important. But sometimes the person is very important. At Christie's in New York in January, they're going to offer for sale the Vesalius, the first important anatomical book, big folio with lots of woodcuts of guts and other things, annotated by Vesalius himself.
Oh my God.
Now, I don't know what the estimates are, but it's going to sell in the millions.
It'll
for sure.
be astronomical.
Yeah.
Yeah. Phil, you also, I was reading about you, and of course we've talked and so on, but you, at some point I read that maybe you started as a generalist, but then got more specific, and the specificity, your area of interest was binding, or bindings.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about that. I've seen some of the pictures, and they're just gorgeous.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway.
Well, in the beginning, I had no money, and so I had to buy whatever I could afford to buy.
Yeah.
And I never really shied away from anything where I thought, I can afford this, and maybe someone will want to buy it.
Yeah.
But over the years, we have, as a business, directed our attention towards illuminated manuscripts, 13th, 14th, 15th century, even back to the 9th century. Illustrated books of all kinds, but as you say, bindings. As a matter of fact, I think it's truthful to say that if somebody in the USA wanted to find a dealer who could supply fine bindings, they would be smart to come up to us first. Now, bindings in some ways are easy. You look at it and you say, oh my God, that's beautiful, you know? How much intelligence does it take to say that? But Cokie Anderson, who does the main cataloging now for bindings, can tell you, you know, well, who the binder is and about the binder's career and what went wrong in his personal life and how this binding compares as a later binding in his career to an earlier binding and so on. And so there is more to it than just, God, that's purdy,
Sure,
you know.
sure. Now, tell me, is Cokie the one of your staff identified that a page of a monk's prayer book was repaired with a piece from an older prayer book? Do you recall that
That
story?
would probably be Kate,
Oh, okay.
because she's the one who specializes. She's in our manuscript department.
Okay.
She is our manuscript department.
Okay. Yeah, I just, if you want to talk about that, I thought it was so interesting.
Well, it's a fascinating business, and it's always been very romantic for me because there's so much that I don't know about it.
Sure.
And one of the issues with early manuscripts is, you know, what is their history? And I have dealt a couple of times with what are called, oh gosh, I can't, palimpsests. Palimpsests. It's a good word to know when you're in at a cocktail party. Anyway, what it is, it's a manuscript that was written, and then it was scraped away.
Really?
And then another manuscript was written over it. But almost always, in fact always, otherwise they wouldn't be able to recognize it, always it isn't completely scraped away. So I bought a 14th century manuscript, but you could see traces of an 11th century manuscript
Oh, my
underneath it.
goodness.
And whoa, that makes it way more interesting.
So, this is not written with a ballpoint pen, and I suspect it's not on paper. Is it? So
It's
is
on
it,
vellum
It's
or
vellum.
parchment, yeah.
Okay, and then what is the writing instrument? Is it? I would think, you know, I see like ink. I visualize.
It's a quill
something-
pen.
Okay.
Yeah.
And but the ink itself can be scraped away.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay.
In fact, if you look at images illuminated in medieval manuscripts
Okay.
of scribes, and there are quite a number of them that show up because
Yeah.
you know, why not show myself? I'm doing this manuscript.
Sure.
The scribe in one hand has his quill pen, and the other hand has a knife,
Ah,
and the knife scrapes away his mistakes.
that's their eraser.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Again, it leads me to you and I visited some days ago. You let me handle, I guess it's called a book. I don't know, manuscript. I don't know the right terminology.
It's a book, sure.
And
It's a book before printing came along.
okay, and I was thrilled. I have to tell you, I was thrilled for a couple
And
of
I
reasons.
didn't charge you either, as I recall.
Well, I haven't paid it. I know that.
Whatever.
Yeah. So, but to handle this thing, and I think like communicate with somebody over the centuries.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm holding this thing that somebody held, and letter by letter wrote this, and again, hundreds of years old. And so a couple of things: the beauty of it, the thrill of it, but also that it was in good enough shape. I mean, this didn't come out of a printing press. Somebody did this, and I'm holding it.
Yeah. No, the connection that you're talking about, that has always been at the heart
Yeah.
of the pleasure that comes with dealing with antiques of any kind, but
Yeah.
in particular books for me. And I remember before I even had a clue that I would be an antiquarian bookseller, I used to look for artifacts in the fields in Iowa where I grew up in the springtime. And I would find this axe head that was so beautifully done, and it somehow had survived.
Right.
And whammo, I was 3,000 years across time,
Right.
you know, connecting with some guy who was shivering to death in his teepee or whatever,
Yeah.
making this implement that was simply, you know, a tool for him.
Sure.
But now it's an object of beauty, and
You
hard to
think
beat that.
about that person, it would be impossible for them to imagine that some 3,000 years later, Phil would be tromping through there and pick this thing up. I
Yeah.
mean, it's just, again, it's that connection. So you said Iowa. Where in Iowa?
Son of a gun. I was born in Davenport,
Really?
just before an eminent author from McMinnville.
Was born. Actually, I wasn't born there, but I
Oh,
lived-
that's right, but you
Yeah.
lived there very shortly
Yeah,
after I did.
and I have to, coincidence, I have to think you and I were neighbors. We didn't know it, but
Yeah.
there had to be an overlap.
There was an overlap.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so-
And that was kind of a heyday for the town, I think,
Well, until we left.
until we left.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about the stone. So actually, somewhere in our family, we have, and I think it was probably found in a cornfield there, it's not an axe head. I would call it a hammerhead because it's not sharp. It's a stone, and it's not metal, it's stone, and it's big. But then there's a indentation.
A
I think,
groove?
a groove where they fixed a handle.
Yeah, right.
So I'm with you on that one. Oh, this is interesting. So you have early printed books, but I was reading that the first use, or at least widespread use, of the printing press was not to disseminate knowledge, because at that time most people couldn't read. What the Catholic Church did was crank out indulgences, and it was a money-making operation.
That was in the 16th century.
Oh, so later.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean,
because the printing press was what, the 1400s?
yeah, most people say 1455, and there were a few printing locations in the 1460s, 1470, 1480, 1490. A lot of theological books, not very many books of other kinds. Then, as the Reformation approached and the abuses of the
Right.
Catholic Church became more flagrant,
Yeah.
it was the reason it became so flagrant was because they were churning out these indulgences.
Isn't
You
it
know,
something?
buy this and you get into heaven.
It's a get out of jail free card.
Yeah, easy as pie. But that, you're right, it was a big seller at the beginning of the 16th century.
Yeah. So this, I was thinking, I get to ask anything because it's my show. And one of the things that I hadn't prepared for from this, but then got to thinking about, I've seen books, probably older, although not as old as you're talking about, where there's a sort of a translucent piece of paper in between the page of text and a picture.
Oh yeah,
And-
it's called the tissue guard.
So I assume that that's what it was to guard. Is that the beginning and the end of it? Is it just to?
Now, what happens
the
is
pages,
one of the
paper?
problems with paper in general, but paper especially with iron content, is that it will become foxed. It'll be spotted.
Okay.
And if you've got paper that's spotted facing an illustration,
Okay.
then the spotting transfers onto that illustration and ruins it in a way.
Sure.
So if you've got this tissue guard, it protects it.
Okay. So that really, again, brings me to another question. Some of the things that you've handled are really old and in really good shape. How in the world are they just locked away and never handled? What's the history, or is there a common history? Probably not.
That's a very good question. Some of the earlier things that we've dealt with are from the 15th century, and they're prayer books, and they're called books of hours, and they're for laymen, for a family, not for monks. And they're done by studios. You contact this workshop and say, okay, I've got 1,200 ducats to spend on this, and I want images of the crucifixion and the and the Annunciation to the shepherds and the three magi and so on, so on, so on. And they produce it, they deliver it, and it's a treasure. And you don't do anything except protect it as a treasure.
It's to be treasured.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And especially if it's made for somebody who has great wealth, it will be thought of as a treasure, and it'll be passed down and passed down and passed down that way. Now, there are certain kinds of books that you'll never find in good condition, like herbals and children's books and Bibles, because they are inevitably subjected to hard use.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was thinking, so this is a business. You're in business. This is your career. And fundamentally, a business involves money, profit. But it's not just that. And I think that from reading this, your great pleasure was not only the books as historical artifacts and so on, but it was the people that you collaborated with, who helped you, that you helped them. And I want you to pick maybe one or two or whatever you want to talk about. But I was thinking about Edwin Hall.
That's who I was going to say.
Yeah, okay. Can you talk about him a little bit?
Ed Hall was an academic, Wayne State University. He was a teacher of art, and he was a student, a scholar, and produced important scholarly works on early painting. And he was interested in early books. And unlike so many collectors who amass things, and who, if you ask them, you know, what's the book that you care most about, or what's the book that's most interesting in your collection, they couldn't tell you. You know, Ed Hall knew every book and knew where it came from, and he knew all about, you know, who annotated it, and it was wonderful. And he never crowed about how special his collection was,
or his knowledge.
Or his knowledge.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just quickly, I'll tell you the story. I met him.
Yeah.
I was exhibiting at the Detroit book fair, and my inventory was so modest that, you know, I should have been embarrassed. But I did have one 15th century book, and that's what he collected. And he came into my booth and he said, I don't have a lot of money, but I'll trade you.
Yeah.
I've got the first printing in English of Euclid. And the first printing in English of Euclid is a very interesting book, because it has all kinds of little pop-ups like paper dolls, to show triangles and hypotenuses and all that kind of stuff. I'll trade you this for your incunable. And I was inexperienced, but this didn't look like a fair trade to me. It looks like, you know, his book was worth 5 times what my work was worth, and mine was $950.
Yeah.
So I said, "Are you sure?" You know, and he said, "Yeah." And so it happened, and then a friendship developed, and he lent me money. He helped with descriptions. He knew more about the world than any up to 1700 than any person I've ever met or could imagine.
Yeah.
And so if we got anything old, I called up Ed and I say, "What do you know about this convent in Umbria?" You know, and boom, he would tell me. You know, he wouldn't even have to look it up.
Right.
You know? And anyway, he's 92 years old. It's the last time I'm going to see him. We know he's got a terminal illness.
Right.
And I told him, I said, "Ed, I feel guilty. And I have never told you, but I feel guilty about this trade that brought us together."
Yeah.
And he said, "Don't worry. That book cost me $5
Oh my gosh.
in a little junk shop in Rome."
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
And I know that so your staff is knowledgeable. You have this sort of, it sounds like a network of people that you can call on. And you talk about you being a writer and asking Mr. Hall for a description. It seemed to me, I don't think you said this, but I deduced that the success of Pirages books is in large part the descriptions, that they're accurate and they dig into the history. And would you agree with that?
Well, thank you for saying that. See, here I am in rural Oregon under a rock. You know, I'm not in L.A., I'm not in New York, I'm not in Boston, I'm not in London. And so from the beginning, I tried to produce sexy catalogs that people would notice. And part of what they ought to notice is what I say, not just that they're flashy,
Right.
but also that the writing is articulate and substantial.
Yeah.
It tells things of substance. And we developed a reputation.
Yeah.
And thank you for mentioning my staff. I've got 4 people, Koki, Kate, Tammy, and Jill. I've been in business 47 years. There's 47 years experience with
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
And so, yes, they know what they're doing.
Yeah. No, they sound terrific. Our show is a little bit longish, but I thought this was a special one. We got to talk about Mr. Walker. And you told me a story starting with his name. I don't know if this was a sort of a joke or if you really had, not concerns, but you wanted to see, is this a real guy?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. We put out, I bought a collection of Bibles from a urologist in Snohomish,
Okay.
which is a story in itself. And we put out a catalog with a whole bunch of early Bibles.
Yeah.
And we got an order from a guy named Jay Walker for more money than we had ever got for an entire catalog.
Yeah.
Not just one person, but an entire catalog. And the guy's name was Jay Walker, as in Jaywalker. And we thought, this is a ruse,
Yeah.
you know. And I am not making this up, although you're going to say, oh, you made this up. 2 weeks before, some guy had gotten in touch with us, and his name, he said, was lukewarm. Okay, so I thought, oh, here we go. It's probably the same guy.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know. But I mean, this long list of Bibles he wanted, and the bottom line was immense. Can't happen. And next day, FedEx comes up with the check, and we're thinking, whoa, what have we got into?
Yeah.
Yeah. And what was amazing was, I mean, this guy, he lives in Connecticut.
Yeah.
And he's got connections, a person of his stature.
Sure.
And he could have had any well-established bookseller be his guy.
Yeah.
But he asked me to help him. He asked me to give him advice. And these turned into regular conversations and then meetings, and then I became his representative.
Yeah.
And wow, that opened up all kinds of avenues to meeting colleagues and making friends
Sure.
with dealers I never really knew before, because I couldn't buy a $100,000 book. Give me a break,
Yeah.
you know. But I could buy a $100,000 book for Jay.
Sure.
And so I got to know Fritz Muller, you know, from the Netherlands, because he had those kinds of books, and he's a swell guy. And we've had a, you know, and that's, you could multiply that example by 20, 25 times.
Sure.
It's a wonderful experience.
Now, these books that I'm sort of filling in the blanks here, and I've told stories about you, and I hope most of it is true. But I think that these books, by and large, maybe exclusively, went to his museum, the Jay Walker Museum of Human Imagination. Is that pretty accurate?
The Jay Walker Library of the History of Human Imagination.
Oh, okay. And am I right that you were then asked to curate that section of the museum or the library?
No.
Okay.
He doesn't have a librarian.
Okay.
And the catalog of his collection, the only catalog he has is the records of the sales that we have made to him or that we've brokered for him.
Okay.
So in that sense, we're kind of curators, but he sees himself as the curator. And it's been a wonderful experience for him. He uses his library.
Which is gorgeous, by the way.
Well, it's spectacular,
Yeah.
is what it is.
Yeah, yeah.
But he uses his library in his business and in cultivating
Yeah.
personal relationships, and he loves his books. Hello, you
Yeah.
know, who wouldn't? Yeah,
He's,
you can go to Walker Digital
Right.
and take a 4-minute video tour, and you get a sense of what it's like.
There's a video on YouTube, and in fact, I think there's several. One of them is visually stunning, but there's no voiceover. And I wish that they would talk about.
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Okay, and because some of the well, like a Sputnik. I mean, not everybody has that, and an Enigma,
Mm-hmm.
and of course then the books and so on. And I think, am I right about this? That the at least the interior is somewhat reflective of Escher's painting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, architecturally, it's supposed to reflect Escherism.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's startling. It's a wonder, and it's very cleverly
Yeah.
designed.
Yeah.
And I've spent a fair amount of time there.
Yeah.
For various reasons.
Ridgefield,
Ridgefield. Yeah.
Connecticut.
Yeah.
So
But it's coming up on 23 years that we've been working together.
yeah.
And the vast majority of the fine books in that collection have come through us.
Right.
And that's my word, you know. What a wonderful experience.
You bet. Two things that did you want to say anything else about Mr. Walker or any of the collaborators that you've encountered? And I know there's so many, but
It would be hard to know where to stop.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Then I'll stop with that portion. And I just wanted to give you an opportunity to mention, if you want to, your foundation, to give a little.
Oh, wow. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. 15 years ago, my wife, Ellen
Yeah.
Summerfield, and Tricia Crawford,
Okay.
who has since died, and I decided that we had a little bit of money. Economically, Yamhill County was not in good shape.
Right.
And we thought, what can we do to help? How can we set something up that would allow us to help people who were in need?
Yeah.
And over the course of 15 years, mainly through the very hard work of Ellen, we have grown in our in what we do and how much we do, and in community support.
Yeah.
And we help school kids, we help seniors, we help people who are looking for jobs,
Yeah.
and we help people who are just have a variety of needs
Right.
that make their lives really difficult.
Yeah.
And they apply to Give a Little,
Yeah.
and we're at givealittlefoundation.org. You can
Yeah.
find us.
Yeah.
They apply, and we look at their application, and if you know they're on target, we can't buy a car for you, but
Right.
you know, maybe we can help you repair a car if you need to use it to get a job, or at least we can give you a gas card,
Right.
you know, or a bus pass or something.
Right.
We don't give out large sums of money, but it's always been our model to give out $500 or less,
Mm-hmm.
but at the right time. When somebody, you know, I've got a job interview, I need to get there, can I go to buy some clothes,
Right.
you know, or I've got a job now, but I need boots with a
Steel-toed.
steel-toed boots. It's $150.
Yeah.
Can you help me? Answer is absolutely.
Yeah.
That's give a little foundation.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for asking.
Yeah. I think life can be pretty hard, and sometimes what seems like a little bit is the world.
Oh, absolutely.
Or
yeah.
It's the right thing at the right time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's what you guys do.
Yeah.
Phil, thank you so much. This has been a pleasure and an honor. Folks watching, I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And
Well, thank you for asking me. You know,
absolutely.
I've enjoyed it.
Okay. See you next time on The Writing Life. And go to my website, stephenwlong.com. I'm lonely. Give me a message. Talk to you later. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.